as a graduate student, I was curious, like, if you're a Neanderthal and all you have is this close range weapon, what does the edible world look like to you? What I did was I just like looked up everything that I could about known foraging groups and what kind of tools they were using and what hunting methods they were using with them, what prey sizes they were taking. And a couple of things that came out of that. One was that it doesn't matter if they had atlatls like Australian Aborigines, where it's called a woomera, or bow and arrow or whatever. Everybody still had thrusting spears. Handheld thrusting spears. And in fact, if you think about it, an M4A1 rifle is one of the most sophisticated projectile weapons ever made. And it has a bayonet mount, which turns it into a thrusting spear.
Right.
Because a thrusting spear is a different tool for a different job. It's a killing tool. It's a dispatching tool.
I feel like it could also be like so defensive just because of like the rigidity of it too.
Yes. So if you're out in an environment where you're encountering carnivores, good to have a big, heavy thing that you can use to keep those carnivores at bay. But really what I found was that handheld spears, whether they're thrown or they're thrust, are basically contact weapons. If they're thrown, they're thrown from about 5 meters away. Because beyond that, they don't have any flight stability. They glance off the prey, and then you don't have the thing in your hand, unless you're carrying multiple of them, you're kind of in a bind. So that really colored my thinking about the way that Neanderthals were hunting.
All right, everybody, welcome back to this episode of People Hayden's Not Qualified to Talk to, also known as the Backcountry Manifesto podcast. I'm your host, your buddy out west, Hayden Samak, and today we are talking to Duke University's Dr. Stephen Churchill. Stephen Churchill, Steve, is a evolutionary anthropologist, and he's also a human paleontologist. That does not mean that he is a human who is also a paleontologist. He studies ancient folks. He's been featured in all sorts of really cool stuff like Wired Tech Support, where that's basically Twitter throwing him an AMA where he answers all sorts of cool questions about ancient folks. Today we're talking to him as he frames early man as the ultimate survivalist. We're going to cover everything from diets to shelters to how they interact with large carnivores and a whole bunch more. Steve is a lovely guest. It was so much fun to have him. He's become a buddy. He's going to become your buddy. And so without further ado, Steve Churchill. Welcome, Steve.
I'm so happy to be here. I mean, this has just been fun already, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you a little bit about.
Oh, dude, this is like, I feel so lucky that I get to do this because the folks that we get to chat with are just kind of, we get to talk to a lot of people that are like really at the forefront of their particular sports or, areas of research. And for you, that would be the field of paleoanthropology.
Yeah.
But talk to us a little bit about paleoanthropology, kind of outline it and then talk about your specific field like your specific interests.
Yeah. So paleoanthropology is a broad term for the study of prehistory, right? Uh-huh. And it includes kind of like two major parts. There's Paleolithic archaeology, where, people study artifacts, stone tools, whatnot. And then there's hominin paleontology, where we study the bones of our ancestors or closely related species. And I'm on that side. I do a little bit of the archaeology stuff, and it's figured like very prominently in the work that I do and the way that I think about things. But most of the work I do is on the bones themselves. And so I've been really, really fortunate. Most of my career, I have worked on Neanderthals, who are like a close cousin to us. We shared an ancestor with them about 500,000 years ago. And they're really cool because they're so like us in so many ways, but they're kind of different. And so they kind of they're like, hey, if we were to roll the tape back and let it run again, we'd get a different outcome. And the Neanderthals give us one vision of what like an outcome could look like. But I have been a member of this team in South Africa, and we've been really, really fortunate to find some early ancestors, a 2 million year old species called Australopithecus sediba, which has been really, really cool. And for me, it like required a lot of like learning new stuff and working on stuff that was outside of my like earlier area. And then another species called hominins, which is just a really weird, very primitive hominin, but late in time. It's only 250,000 years old. And our own species, Homo sapiens, is around by then.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's like a relic species of hominin. Cool. Yeah.
So it's a lot like, I'm trying to like think of like something to compare it to.
Yeah, well, some people might have heard of the hobbits, these little weird hominins in Indonesia.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's like them, but an African version.
Yeah. Like I said in like the intro, man, when I saw you on that Wired tech support segment, I was like, dude, I need to talk to this dude. I don't know what I'm going to talk to him about, but I need to talk to him. And so
that was a lot of fun to do.
We got in touch, and then, and actually we'll put that Wired tech support segment in the show notes below. Anyway, when we got in touch, I was like, okay, man, I want to talk to you. I just don't know about what. And you brought up the idea of early man is the ultimate survivalist.
Yeah.
We're going to tackle that in a handful of parts. Part one is going to be, we'll talk about them as gatherers, because that is something that I feel like people have a lot of questions about, but maybe don't know that they had a lot of questions about, right? So I pick a bunch of mushrooms, and a lot of people joke when I take them, looking for mushrooms for the first time. They go, well, I wonder how they figured out like this one was edible and this one. It's like, oh, well, Kevin tried this and died, so don't eat that one anymore. So I think people are kind of curious about the evolution and of our palates and the risk reward kind of mechanism that fueled it. Then I want to talk about folks as hunters.
Yeah.
And then I want to talk about early folks and their practical day-to-day dangers, particularly large carnivores. Maybe a little bit of how they treated certain ailments, whether they were like, injuries or disease, and shelter. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Let's go.
So, I guess first and foremost, why do you think of early man as the ultimate survivalist? Like what kind of things jump to mind?
Yeah. One thing that's really interesting to me is if you go back in time, if you could go back, and people say if you had a time machine, when would you go back? And I'd be like, I want to go like 250,000 years ago, because there's like 9 or 10 different kinds of humans on the planet. Neanderthals in Europe and our own species in Africa and things like Naledi that I was just talking about and Flores and stuff. And now there's just us. And I think that tells a really interesting story about us and the way that we're different from all the other, like our relatives, other human ancestors that walked on the planet. So yeah, I think there's a really really interesting kind of story there. And one of the things that's really remarkable about humans, and I think this applies to a lot of ancestors too, is that we're dietarily flexible, right? We're omnivores. We have dentition that's suited to eating a range of things. We have guts, which are good for, eating plant material, animal material. And that allows us to adapt our diet to whatever is producing calories in any environment. So if you go in the tropics, humans are eating 86% plant material and 14% animals, which is the ratio of what's producing. You go to the Arctic, humans can't eat the plant growth up there. They're eating 100% animal, so that gives us a lot of flexibility. And then we're big brained, which makes us behaviorally.
Some of us.
Yeah, exactly. Makes us behaviorally really flexible. We're technological. And so we use that technology. And, when Europeans first started colonizing the planet, everywhere they went, there were already people there. Didn't matter if it was like, high altitude, little islands in the Pacific, steamy jungles, desert. Didn't matter. There were people there. And people did that as hunters and gatherers. This was even before, we populated the world with the exception of Antarctica.
Yeah.
Living as hunters and gatherers.
Yeah, without the benefits of domesticated livestock and,
so it's a remarkable story. And I don't know if I answered your question because I completely lost the thread of what you asked.
I think you did. And I think like the crux of it is that we were able, or various kind of incarnations of us were able to effectively survive in any environment.
Yeah.
Not only, and without the benefit, again, of like an agrarian sort of society.
Right.
In order to survive entirely on foraged and hunted, not even to just feed ourselves, but to feed entire communities and sustain communities and stay in these areas, for long periods of time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really amazing when you consider that a 2-week survival story in modern times is a miracle,
Yeah.
So let's talk about, when people think of modern man, right? I guess when you're in grade school, you're taught about the Fertile Crescent and, that area of the land between two rivers, right?
That's totally the wrong story.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Nobody ever wanted to be a farmer.
Yeah.
Foragers actually have got a good life and they've got a lot of leisure time. And there have been cases like there's a group in Tanzania called the Hadza, which still live a foraging lifestyle. And the Tanzanians are embarrassed about that, because they think it makes them look backwards. And as a third world country, I think, they don't like that image. So periodically, like folks from the development office or, agricultural department or whatever will go out and round the Hadza up and try to settle them in a village and teach them how to plant. And they go back a few months later and they're all gone. They're back in the bush, right? Because it's a good life.
Yeah.
People adopted agriculture because they had to. Populations were growing, and that limits, foraging is sustainable at certain population levels, but you basically have got to get into food production. And those early agriculturalists, it must have been horrible. Their diseases are through the roof. Their nutrition is poor, because for the first time they're living at higher population density where infectious diseases become more of a
they can
problem.
Circulate. Yeah.
Hygiene, and local pollution is a problem. Diet quality, because protein starts to drop in the diet and it's more carbohydrate-based diet. So you start seeing a bunch of anemias and stuff like that. Stature goes down. So probably, we've gotten now to the point where we're good at it, right? And so it's very comfortable.
But the first attempts are not like what I'm imagining, like these like fields of green and this very like these pioneers of agriculture just being stoked on this decision. Right. It was a bunch of people that were like, we don't have a better option. This shit sucks, but like we got to keep doing it.
Yeah, we like to think of the evolution of these things as like progress. It's like, oh, somebody got the bright idea to plant stuff, and that's easier than foraging. But it's a lot of times it's not progress. It's like necessity,
Well, it's funny. It's like, oh, we want to talk about paleo folks foraging, and the very first thing I direct the conversation to is stopping foraging. Let's talk about the good times. Let's talk about before the land between two rivers, which I just now found out was a disaster.
Yeah.
Tell me about it, man. Like,
So just to paint like the big picture stuff, right? So our closest living relatives are chimpanzees and bonobos, right? And we shared an ancestor with them on the order of about 6 million, 7 million years ago, or maybe even a bit earlier than that. So we've had our own like separate evolutionary story for the last 7 or 6 million years. And about the first 4 or 5 million years of that are basically things, and I hate this term, but it is, I think, a really useful term. They're Ape-Men.
Okay.
Right? Like if you saw one.
Why do you hate that term?
Because it seems so like Victorian kind of like.
Yeah, it does sound old timey, doesn't it?
Yeah,
sure.
But it's a useful term because
it gets the point across.
If you saw these things, they're like the size of chimpanzees. They have brains that are the size of chimps. Their body proportions and chest shape and everything is very chimp-like. Their ecology and behavior was probably very chimp-like. But you'd go, yeah, but that thing's walking on 2 legs.
Yeah.
Right? So Ape-Man is kind of a useful term. And then about 2 million years ago, things start to change for reasons we could talk about if you're interested. And we start to see the first hominins that I would call like human.
Yeah.
Right? Early humans.
You'd like recognize.
You would go, like, yeah, that's a kind of strange looking human, but that's a trick.
That's a dude.
Bigger brains, smaller faces, bodies shaped more like ours, longer legs, shorter arms, that kind of thing. And the beginning of real technological dependence.
What was the impetus for that change?
Yeah. So I think what's happening. So, one other thing too is like human evolution is not like just, a lot of people have probably seen the illustrations of like an ape-like thing walking and then a less ape-like.
Sure.
It's not like that. It's like this crazy bush. We recognize about 28 different species of early humans, and we argue a lot about how everybody's related to one another. So there's a lot of competition going on, probably between different groups of hominins and terrestrial monkeys.
Okay.
And what's happening in environmentally is the glaciers are starting to come on. Africa never experienced glaciers, so the early part of our evolution is entirely in Africa.
Okay.
Africa never experienced glaciers, but during glacial episodes, it gets very dry in Africa. And so forests are starting to break up, grasslands are expanding, and terrestrial monkeys start like expanding. Baboons, including like giant ancestral baboons, they're like terrestrial colobus monkeys, all kinds of monkeys on the ground. So all of these monkeys and hominins are dietary generalists. We can all eat the same kind of thing. So we're all competing with each other. And we see like a split in adaptive strategies occurs at that time. And there's a branch of our family which basically just says, "Fuck it, I'm out." And they start going for the stuff that nobody wants. The low quality, high fiber, and they evolve these massive teeth and massive jaws, and they have like a sagittal crest like a gorilla because their temporal muscles are so big for working these big jaws. And they're probably just eating like really low quality, high fiber plant material or hard shelled stuff or whatever. And the other side of the family, which gives rise to our lineage, basically starts using simple tools like these. And with a little tool like this, you can get at stuff that you otherwise cannot get at. You can break open long bones and get
marrow.
Yeah, marrow fat, which is calorie rich and, good nutrition. You can open up brain cases and get fat rich brains, which have got the kinds of fats which support bigger brains. You can get plant material, all kinds of things.
I see that.
Yeah. So that's, it's not an actual artifact. It's a replica of something that you might pick up like 1.8 million years ago, 2 million years ago in Africa. That's called a chopper.
What's it do?
Yeah. Well, oddly enough, it's probably just a core where they're driving off flakes. You can see the flake scars, and that may be the discard. That they're just going for the sharp edges because they can use them to get at stuff. But we know they're sometimes using these things too because they have edgeware where they're using them as butchery tools or whatever. And that side of our family tree just goes down that avenue of like, hey, technology to get high quality resources out of the environment. And brains start to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Faces get smaller, teeth get smaller. Our guts get smaller because we're eating higher quality food. Probably cooking starts to come in around that time too, which allows us to extract more nutrients.
And how long ago was this?
So we're talking like the shift probably starts around 2 million years ago, and then, just like snowballs from there until here we are, this like incredibly technologically dependent, big brain, high quality diet hominin.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The idea too of, your diet directly influencing so many like evolutionary, I guess, steps. Everything from being being able to crack open a long bone or a brain casing and get to these really fatty, highly caloric.
Yeah. And what's cool is like everything about a male zebra size or larger, even hyenas, which are adapted for cracking bones, can't get in the long bones or brain cases of those things. Yeah. So there's an open niche, which, really it's just bacteria which are eating that stuff. So I think the human movement towards more animal tissue in the diet was early on was a scavenging kind of thing where there's this open niche, and you kind of have to. The
hyena's going to get it, so okay, we'll go. And crack.
Yeah, so you have to know a lot about carnivore behavior. You have to know where carcasses are likely to be and how you can avoid the carnivores. But there's resources to be had out there with technology.
And
so I brought you a little something. There's a little bit of a sad story here.
Okay.
So this is a cast of a 1.6 million year old hominin from East Africa. So most of us would call this Homo erectus. So it's an early Homo erectus. And these are the guys I'm talking about who are basically going down this avenue and, reducing the size and shape of the face and bigger brains and, definitely on the human path. So the sad part of the story. So first off, this is a direct cast where the original specimen was taken and molds were made of it.
I'm gonna adjust your mic, but you keep going, man.
And molds were made of it. These days we 3D scan and we 3D print, and you get a lot of topography and whatnot. So this is like a pretty good, the detail's good. It's not a perfect cast. It's a little too thin in here, and you can see there's a crack back there. So it's not really a cast that bears up well for teaching, but I thought, for your purposes, it might be great.
I get to keep this?
But yeah. This is my gift to the podcast. But I brought it in my carry-on bag, and I had it on top of my other bag, and it toppled over.
Oh, it's okay.
And it punched a little hole
that is
in the side.
That is.
So I'm very sorry about that.
No,
if you want, I can take it back to North Carolina and try to fix it.
No. Leave it here.
Or I can tell you how to put a little paint on there to make it at least look better.
I feel like I'm in Hamlet, dude.
Yeah.
Wow. What can you point out some interesting features on it that might be?
So it would be great if I had some earlier hominins and chimp skulls and whatnot, but the brain is big. The teeth are smaller. We're starting to see here some evidence of a projecting nose.
Oh, sure. The little scoop.
Yeah, exactly. The nasal bones are coming out, and the margins of the nose are everted a little bit. And that's indicating that there's a nose like ours rather than a flat chimpanzee-like nose. And a lot of people don't know this, but the nose plays a critical role in cooling your brain.
Really?
Yeah, because there are veins in the mucosa on the inside of your nose. There's evaporation occurring in there, right? With every breath you take, particularly in a hot, dry environment like East Africa, every breath you take, moisture is being evaporated into that air, and that cools the mucosa. And that blood actually flows back into the brain case to a big sinus called the cavernous sinus. And the carotid artery, which comes up from the heart and is bringing body core temperature blood to the brain, it lays over that cavernous sinus. So the blood never mixes. It's like it's like a pipe laying over a big vat, and the vat has got cool liquid in it, and the pipe's got hot liquid. So heat exchange is occurring.
Yeah.
So it's cooling the blood coming from the heart as it's going to the brain, because the brain is like a big heat producer.
Mm-hmm.
So this is probably a reflection of the fact that these guys are much more active in a hot environment, because, hey, if you're going to scavenge carcasses, you want to be out there when the carnivores are going to be least active, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the middle of the day.
Okay.
So these guys are probably much more active during the middle of the day. They're walking farther. We start to see body shape changing, longer legs, striding bipedalism like we have. So this is K&M ER 3733 from East Africa, from a site called Kubifora. Oh, and this is a female, by the way, female early Homo erectus. The males have got bigger brow ridges.
Thought it was kind of cute.
Yeah. It's a nice specimen.
Oh my gosh.
So anyway.
How fun. That's amazing. Thank you so much for bringing this. We got to find a special spot of honor for this one, man. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Very cool. So what kind of vegetation was this hominin maybe eating? We talked briefly about the divergence.
Yeah.
Around 2 million years ago.
Yeah.
The folks that said, I'm not competing with the monkeys.
Right.
I'm taking my ball and going home. I'm going to eat like this fiber dense stuff that nobody else wants to eat. Everybody knows they eventually became the panda bear. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly.
But then there was another subsect.
Yeah.
Tell me about that subsect.
Yeah. So if we go back to like the little Ape-Men, most of them are in a genus called Australopithecus. So we often refer to them as Australopiths. They have bigger cheek teeth than like a chimpanzee. So that's probably because they're living out in somewhat drier, more open country environments where there's more grit and tooth wear is heavier. But their front teeth are still like very large incisor teeth, which looks like they're still eating a good bit of fruit, maybe some leafy stuff, but also maybe starting to dig up underground storage organs and plants, like tubers and things like that. So they're probably technologically aided, because even chimpanzees make and use tools, and they'll do it in subsistence contexts. They even use tools in hunting. Chimps have been observed to make spears, and they'll spear little bush babies out of hollows of trees. Yeah, it's wild.
I've seen them using like sticks to collect ants and stuff.
Yeah,
like
termiting
that.
sticks and whatnot. And there are places where they'll crack nuts with hammer and anvil and all that. But most of that early tool use was probably like just wooden sticks and stuff that doesn't preserve in the archaeological record. So they're probably doing some extractive foraging, like digging in the dirt to get good quality
hunting up truffles,
tubers and whatnot. Yeah. And then we start to find the first stone tools a little before 3 million years, back to about 3.3 million. But they don't become very common in the archaeological record until after 2.5 million. And that's really starting to like reflect our side of the family tree, going, hey, these stone tools are really, really useful for a variety of things.
This is kind of I'm not sure how useful this question is, but I'll ask it anyhow. Figuring out that a stone tool was used 2.5 million years ago.
Yeah.
That seems a lot different than, skeletal remains, right? You can carbon date a skeletal remain. Right. I would feel like if you carbon dated a stone tool, it would just tell you when that stone came about. So is it largely like, is it just the context in which you find the stone tool that helps you?
There's a lot of complexity to that answer, because there are a lot of different dating techniques we use. And at any site, we use multiple techniques. But like, for instance, in East Africa, it's volcanically active. So there were volcano eruptions. And the ash in the volcanoes put out particles which we can date using the decay of radioactive particles. So what you get are like these lake margin deposits. Lake margins are great for producing fossils because you need water. So an animal dies on the edge of a lake. its bones get buried in the mud, and you've got the water where you get that transfer of minerals and it becomes like petrified. But what will happen in between is there'll be eruptions of the volcano. So we'll have these datable layers with the fossils in between. So we can bracket the age of the fossils, and same with the stone tools. Yeah. And we do similar things in other places. So I've lost the thread of where we are. So we talked about how we can date some of these.
Oh, yeah. So we were talking about the folks that chose to continue to compete with the monkeys.
So from various lines of evidence, it's clear that our side of the family tree starts going towards a higher quality diet kind of thing. Yeah. We start to find stone tools. We start to find cut mark bones. Okay. So they're clearly using the stone tools on cut mark bones. We know they're also using them on plant material because, sometimes in the little microfractures on the edges,
fibers
fibers or phytoliths, the little silica cell wall of the plants will be embedded in there. We can identify. So we know like some of these were used on cattails. Oh. Yeah, I don't know. Can you eat a cattail?
They have a tuber at the bottom. Okay. That people have been using that as a starch kind of forever. Me and my buddies, when we were kids, we tried to boil up a whole bunch of those because we found out about it. And as it turns out, it is very hard for a bunch of 13-year-olds to replicate a gourmet meal with cattails. Yeah. But
yeah, and there's other lines of evidence too. So our teeth start getting smaller. That suggests that the foods that we're eating are requiring less oral processing, right? So that could be more animal tissue in the diet because animal tissue is easy to digest relative to fibrous plant material. So you just need to get the particles small enough that you can swallow them, right? It could also reflect cooking or some kind of food processing, like just pounding stuff up, plant matter up to break up the fiber.
Really primitive mortar and pestle type deal.
Exactly. Another line of evidence is tapeworms. So, humans can get infested by tapeworms. Yeah. And we always thought that those tapeworms we got from like cattle and pigs and stuff from agriculture. Sure. But it turns out when they sequence the genomes of these tapeworms, that they're actually the ones that infest humans are sister taxon to the ones that infest lions and hyenas and wild dogs in Africa. And that like the two lines converge about 1.5 million years ago, which indicates that humans are coming into contact with saliva or feces or something like that of carnivores, which suggests that humans are doing stuff around carcasses, interacting with carcasses, which may already have saliva from carnivores on them. And brains start getting bigger. And, the problem if you're a gorilla or even a chimpanzee is a fibrous diet requires a really long gut. And guts are metabolically expensive. So we just don't have the space in our metabolic budget to run a large gut and a big brain. Yeah. Right? So a higher quality diet doesn't make our brains get bigger, but it allows our brains to get bigger.
Gotcha.
Because our guts can get smaller.
Okay, that's interesting.
And so we're seeing all these things like together in one package: bigger brain, smaller faces, tools, etc.
So a lot of these things are side effects, not directly like caused.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. Okay, so everything about this conversation is steering us towards talking about the stuff that people are like, dude, just let them talk about the hunting, let them talk about the that.
Well, let's talk about foraging.
But before we go, I brought up earlier the idea of like, Kevin, try that mushroom. Mushroom kill Kevin. Don't eat that mushroom.
Right.
How did they eliminate these things? Was it just like observation of what other animals ate?
Right. So, I think part of it, the reason that I can't really give a great answer to that is that a lot of it is that an organism learns what to eat often from its parents.
Yeah, it's generational.
Right? Yeah, so like a bear cub will forage with mama, and when mama eats something, it'll sniff mama's breath, and it learns that's edible, right? So, part of it just goes way, way back into our primate ancestry and, and some stuff like fruit. So our ancestors were big into fruit, right? Frugivores and chimps still, like, particularly during certain parts of the year, like 50% or more of their diet can be fruit. And fruit is made to be eaten, right? In an evolutionary sense, because it's a seed distribution mechanism that the plant uses. So, like, fruit's not going to be poisonous, right? But then there are other tricks, like foragers, if they want to try a new plant food, they'll try stuff like, first grinding it up and rubbing it on your skin. And if you haven't developed a rash in a day, then you might try ingesting a little bit and seeing what happens. And then you can go from there.
If you're listening and you're under 18 years old, don't do that.
Right.
If you're above 18 years old, you kind of got what's coming to you if you decide to give that a try. But just it's not foolproof.
Yeah,
Sorry.
It's not foolproof. So I think that a lot of it is just like what the generations before me did.
Yeah,
I do. Now, a thing that's interesting to me, and I don't have any kind of crystal ball, I can look back and do that, is as hominins moved into novel environments, how did they figure out in those novel environments? Like, where are the calories and which of those calories can I eat?
What do you think that maybe is just those transitions happened on such a time scale that because that's like the thing that I get so hung up with in this is like when people are like the Ice Age, like my brain goes, one day it was real hot, the next day it was real cold. I like just think about things and that, but these geologic time scales are just like amazing. Like, so.
Yeah. And like when you look at the migration, so like I said, the first part of our evolutionary story is entirely African.
Mm-hmm.
And then around 2 million years ago, we start to pick up hominins outside of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
The first place is in the Republic of Georgia, right, in Western Asia. And people think like, oh yeah, the hominins in Africa were like, I wonder what's out there.
Yeah,
and they pack their bags
going the Oregon Trail.
Yeah, but it's not. I don't think it's like that. I think it's just that they're doing well for themselves and their populations are expanding.
Yeah.
And there's a certain carrying capacity, right, for the environment. So if you're doing well and your population is expanding to where you get to the carrying capacity, either you have to experience some population crashes or you expand.
Yeah.
And a lot of organisms can't really expand because they reach the edge of their ecological tolerance. But again, humans are big brain and technological and behaviorally flexible and inventive. And I think humans figure out ways. So it's not like the environments that they're moving into are completely foreign to them, right? It's just, it's like, that's a little harsher of an environment that I want to live in.
But then sometimes it's also like, oh, but there's these couple things that are way better.
Yeah.
We're going northern and like the ungulates are getting bigger.
Yeah. And sometimes colonization is like, I wonder what's out there, because I think that's how like you get people in Polynesia and Micronesia and Melanesia, like, but maybe even Australia.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like, I feel like that's like our hyper modern attitude of like human migration, of human, colonization in certain areas. It's very much motivated by the spirit of exploration.
Yeah.
Whereas, paleo, I guess, migrations weren't fueled by that. They were just fueled by what you said, right?
But one other thing I wanted to say about foraging, like back in the day, hunting was always had like a central role in thinking about human evolution, right? To the point that people think like hunting made us human, and man the hunter. And in the 1960s, there was a conference that brought together people who were working on different hunter-gatherer groups around the world and got them talking to each other, because people were doing that research, but I don't think there was a lot of cross-communication. And one of the remarkable things that came out of that conference was the importance of foraging, and particularly the importance of female labor to foraging societies. And like I said, in places like the tropics, the bulk of the diet, almost 90%, is plant material. But what's really, really remarkable is that the foraging part allows us to be hunters, because hunting is risky, right? And you can go days without getting anything, right? But the foraging allows males to engage in that risky subsistence behavior because there's always a stable base.
Yeah, it just underpins the whole operation. Exactly. Yeah, so you can afford to do these high risk, high reward expeditions.
Exactly.
But that's super interesting.
Yeah.
You think a lot of times about, like you said, foraging being very secondary to the hunting, and it's like, well, that's a cornerstone, dude.
Yeah,
that's the cornerstone. It's a bunch of berry pickers, man.
Yep.
Okay, well, we're gonna get to the hunting, but first, we're gonna take a break where hopefully you hear from one of our sponsors. Once again, that's probably not Backcountry. We got your letter. We'll get back in 1 second, and I'm gonna pour us a drink. I got something really special. You brought a present for me. I got a present for you.
Fantastic.
Okay. Hey guys, this is Ad Hayden coming to you, or I guess semi-Ad Hayden. We had a whole bunch of ad copy written up, but I don't think I need it for this product. I just want to tell you about something that I like genuinely. That's sharedpour.com. Sharedpour.com is the place to go, in my humble opinion, if you're looking for hard-to-find bourbons, allocated whiskeys. I know that those two are sometimes the same thing, or just spirits in general. I've been using them since way before we even considered being partners with them. Actually, since before, Andrew, I think, when did we start recording episodes for this? Yeah, like since before we recorded the first episode of Backcountry Manifesto. And here, look, here's the receipts to prove it. You see this bottle of Mammoth from our bourbon? That's a single barrel select right there. Now check this out. Here, wait, you can hear it too if you're listening. Right, is that gonna be in frame, Andrew? Okay, well, right here, I don't know. There's my receipt from March of 2024. I really do use these people. I believe in them as a company. They're great folks. Now, if you're 21 or older, that is very important. If you're a minor, pay no attention to this advertisement. And you live in the United States, sharedpour.com will ship liquor straight to your doorstep. You'll need a signature, but they'll do it with flat rate shipping, which is really helpful if you're ordering a couple bottles. That way you don't pay out the nose through shipping. You could order 10, 15 bottles. I don't know, maybe Craig, don't get mad at me. And they will ship for the same price as one. The other thing is that they're customer service experts. If you call them, should you have a problem with your order, and you won't, you will get a person who actually works there answering the phone and making the issue right. They have the best selection, whether it's a single barrel pick, again, a hard to find allocated bourbon, or even your daily sipper. You should check out sharedpour.com. And right now, and that is ad speak, you can use code BACKCOUNTRY, okay? That's Backcountry, all one word, all caps. I think that's important. That's what they were texting me and telling me was important. You will get 10% off your entire purchase at sharedpour.com. Go check them out. You'll like them as much as I do. You'll get a bunch of cool whiskey. You'll impress your friends. You'll annoy your spouse. And you'll have some great spirits. Backcountry for 10% off your order at sharedpour.com. All right, we are back with Dr. Steve Churchill. We're talking early man as the ultimate survivalist, and we're also being joined by Boone, who is elected to come in for the second half of the podcast. We'll see how long he sticks around. Before we left off, I said that I had a present for you, and being that you are a bourbon dude, and being that you had mentioned Buffalo Trace is kind of your favorite, I got something really cool to share with you. Nice. This is a bottle that I came across for a kind of miraculous price. Thank you, Christina. And that's all I'm going to say there. It's called George T. Stagg. It's the kind of pinnacle, like the whole Buffalo Trace thing.
Taste that.
And yes, we can have a little pour of that. We like to do a little drinking on the podcast.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that.
Right, buddy?
Yeah.
Right, buddy? Who's a good boy?
Boone's waiting for his pour. Yeah. Sorry, he's not going to get one. All right. So, itchy boy. Cheers, man.
Cheers. Thank you.
You bet. Boone tried to be a part of that. Okay, so early man as hunters.
That is good.
Yeah, super good, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's one of those holy grail bottles. Man as early hunters. Well, let's talk about the evolution of hunting, right? Because, I mean, originally, if something wanted to eat meat, it had to catch it with its face, basically.
Yeah.
So at what point do we see early man adapt the tools necessary to do what we modern folks would think of as hunting?
Yeah. So it's not entirely clear, and we argue about this all the time. I mean, as scientists, we argue about everything, but that's kind of the way science should be, right?
Right.
So my own perspective is that our entree into being hunters was through scavenging. That, early hominins basically figured out that there were like high quality resources available out there in the environment. And with enough knowledge of carnivore behavior, they could know where these things were and how to get them and whatnot. And, now keep in mind that chimpanzees also hunt on a small level. They'll take little antelopes and colobus monkeys and things like that.
Really?
Yeah. Only males do it. And there are some males who are kind of like most often the initiators of hunts, who maybe you could think of them as like the guys who like to start bar fights or whatever, the guys who are like maybe have a low threshold for boredom.
Yeah.
But then other males will hunt in, and they hunt cooperatively, and they'll kill monkeys and eat monkeys or antelopes or baboons.
Well, I mean, is some of that born out of aggravation, or is it like an intentional thing? Like, is it like, okay, this baboon keeps getting too close to things?
No, it's an intentional thing. Yeah. So it's probably the case that, from the get-go, 7 million years ago, our ancestors were, if they could kill a lizard and eat it, they would do that.
Sure.
Or, whatever. So there's always some like low background of hunting.
Right.
And the
I
real
almost
question,
view that as like foraging, though.
Yeah.
Like that seems like kind of like an opportunistic, like,
Right.
oh, well.
And in fact, like, if you ever wonder, why don't women hunt?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they do that kind of hunting. Like in most foraging societies, women will kill snakes and tortoises and reptiles and stuff.
Yeah.
The real question is, why don't they hunt larger stuff? And I think the real answer there is because females are generally burdened with childcare, and hunting requires some silence and rapt attention and the things that are hard to give when you've got kids in tow. But so that's kind of the background. And then I think my own take is that we start to push that importance of animal tissue basically initially through a scavenging niche. And then somewhere on the order of 800,000 years ago, we start maybe actively hunting bigger stuff.
We say, let's get it direct from the source.
Yeah.
Forget like scavenging these wolf kills or these lion kills or what have you.
Now, there are some of my colleagues who would say, no, active hunting goes way back, like that Homo erectus skull, they were hunting, that they were running prey to exhaustion and then killing it. And, humans are remarkably good endurance runners.
Yeah.
And so the argument is, that we were born to run because it was an important part of our adaptation 2 million years ago. I find that a little bit harder for various reasons to swallow. And part of it is like, hunting's a complicated, like behavioral, it's a whole repertoire of behaviors. And it's not the kind of thing that I think a non-meat eating species can easily move into.
Oh my gosh. Do you know all the tools that I have to kill elk? And do you know how bad I suck at killing elk? Like I couldn't imagine being like, all right.
Well, it's all relative because you're up here and I would be like down here, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, I am not very good at it, man.
So when can we tell that they're actually actively hunting?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the earliest direct evidence. So part of it is like, okay, what parts of the carcasses are they getting? Like, are we seeing parts of carcasses which reflect that they're getting a whole animal and they're cutting off the high utility parts? Or are we getting parts of carcasses which look like what's left behind after carnivores have had at it?
Right.
And
So
also
like ribs, spinal columns,
Right.
things like that versus like the high ticket items.
Right.
I imagine some of those high ticket items, obviously you have like, the front quarters, the back quarters, things of that nature.
Mandibles because of the tongue.
Right. But then I guess like the really high ticket items are like the soft tissues, right? That was kind of
the guts, the entrails, and all that. And unfortunately, there's not bones to leave marks on.
Yeah. How would you know?
But somewhere around 800,000, you start to see like pretty commonly like evidence that they're getting access to fresh carcasses. And also with earlier stuff, it's pretty common that you might see like a carnivore tooth mark with a cut mark on top of it, like overlaying it, which indicates the hominins are getting later access. Whereas after 800,000, it's starting to look like, they're getting fresh stuff, and it looks like active hunting.
And is that just like femurs around encampments? Is it like things like that? Or is it...
basically. Where you've got like stone tools and bones in association, where it looks like a little butchery area. The stone tools are made expediently. They're made on the spot and they're left behind. But that's all really kind of indirect evidence, right? And then there's this remarkable site in Germany, in the north of Germany, which is 400,000 years old. It's called Schöningen. And there are horse bones there. There's a horse scapula, which has got a puncture mark in it, which looks like it's made by a spear. But remarkably, the site is kind of waterlogged. And because it's waterlogged and it was like an anaerobic cold environment, it preserved wooden artifacts.
No.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of spears there. And they're just like untipped wooden spears. They're sharpened to a tip.
Yeah.
And there's, they've been argued to be javelins that were maybe thrown at prey. To me, they look like big, heavy, handheld thrusting spears. But there are some things in there which look like, that could be tossed a ways.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like, prior to like, I guess the atlatl and those kind of advancements, like when somebody's like, oh yeah, it's a spear meant to be thrown, I'm just like, well, that doesn't seem like crazy efficient. That seems like a hard thing to...
When I was a graduate student, the prevailing idea was Neanderthals had like big, heavy, handheld, close-range spears. And then at 20,000, by then you've got the Cro-Magnon are there, the early modern human Europeans. We have the first...
Wait, how did you say that?
Cro-Magnon. A lot of people would say Cro-Magnon. Yeah, it's a French term, so Cro-Magnon.
I like that. It's a little steezier the way that you said it.
So anyway, we have the first direct evidence of spear throwers at 20,000, where you start to get pieces of the hook in the archaeological record. And you start to see artifacts which
pieces
look like...
the hook?
Yeah, the hook of the spear thrower.
The atlatl?
Yeah, the atlatl.
I always call them atlatls.
Yeah, that's such a North American term, and I'm often talking to like European audiences, and so I often say...
Do you know they have an atlatl hunting season in Virginia?
That's crazy.
I think they might have a primitive one in Pennsylvania too. Could you look up the states that do have atlatl seasons? It's like a real thing.
That's crazy.
I kind of have problems with that because, like, so here's if I can go on a brief diatribe about hunting. Oh, Boone's off the clock because he heard Mom come home.
There might be treats involved.
Yeah, so I'm going to trust that the other studio mics will pick this like little diatribe up.
Yeah.
There is a school of thought that says, archery hunting is more ethical because it's more sporting.
Yeah.
I guess by some definition. And for some reason, archery hunting is easier for a lot of folks to like swallow.
Yeah. So putting a debilitating wound like in the hindquarters of a deer that gets away from you and survives is more ethical than killing it straight out
with a rifle.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. I kind of feel like rifle hunting is like kind of the pinnacle of like, ethical hunting, primarily because of that.
Yeah.
And then also, I think it's ironic that a lot of people who have the most ethical qualms with hunting say things like, hunting for sport is wrong. And the way to make it ethical is to make it more sporting.
Right. Right.
We need to play with our food a little bit more. Speaking of playing with the food.
Yeah. So it looks like there are at least 4 states that allow hunting with the atlatl. We've got Alabama, Missouri, Nebraska, and Pennsylvania.
So I assume it's all like white-tailed deer kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's all white-tails.
So yeah, because I'll tell you what a problem with the atlatl is, but I'll get to that in a minute. So that was the prevailing idea, and then the bow and arrow comes in at 10,000.
Right.
And this is all from a very European perspective because that's like the timing that you see in the European archaeological record.
10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, but really we now have evidence that it's in place much earlier, like by 60,000 or earlier in Africa.
I would kind of think so.
Yeah. And that in fact it was like this progress view, right? Like the atlatl dart is better than the handheld spear, and the bow and arrow is better than the dart, and the rifle is better than the bow and arrow, right?
The rifle is better than the bow and arrow, just in case anybody out there is wondering.
So as a graduate student, I was curious, like if you're a Neanderthal and all you have is this close range weapon, what does the edible world look like to you? Like when you're looking out at animals, on grassland or whatever, where if you've got to deploy your weapon within like 10 meters.
It's like cave bears probably aren't high up on your list of things you might try and poke with a sharp stick.
So what I did was I just like looked up everything that I could about known foraging groups and what kind of tools they were using and what hunting methods they were using with them, what prey sizes they were taking. And a couple of things that came out of that. One was that it doesn't matter if they had atlatls like Australian Aborigines, where it's called a woomera, or bow and arrow or whatever, everybody still had thrusting spears, handheld thrusting spears. And in fact, if you think about it, an M4A1 rifle is one of the most sophisticated projectile weapons ever made, and it has a bayonet mount, which turns it into a thrusting spear.
Right.
Because a thrusting spear is a different tool for a different job. It's a killing tool. It's a dispatching tool.
I feel like it could also be like so defensive just because of like the rigidity of it too.
Yes. So if you're out in an environment where you're encountering carnivores, good to have a big, heavy thing that you can use to keep those carnivores at bay. But really what I found was that handheld spears, whether they're thrown or they're thrust, are basically contact weapons. If they're thrown, they're thrown from about 5 meters away. Because beyond that, they don't have any flight stability. They glance off the prey, and then you don't have the thing in your hand, unless you're carrying multiple of them, you're kind of in a bind. So that really colored my thinking about the way that Neanderthals were hunting. But the other thing is that the atlatl, you might wonder, why do Australian Aborigines still use that technology? Like, were they too dumb to invent the bow and arrow? Well, it turns out that kids in Australian foraging groups make bows and arrows and play with them. Yeah. So they clearly, it's not like...
Right, it's not like lost on them. It's like
exactly.
They just like the other thing better.
Right. But the atlatl is basically works as a shock weapon for most prey, where all you need to do is hit the prey. If it's small enough body size, all you need to do is hit it. You're going to cause enough tissue damage. It's going to hemorrhage, and it's going to drop in a reasonable amount of time. Doesn't mean you might not have to track it and chase it for a while, but in a reasonable amount of time, right? And in Australia, when humans first got there were mega marsupials, but they got hunted to extinction pretty quickly. And now, like, the biggest stuff are like, red kangaroo, which are about 90 kilos. So there was never any impetus to abandon that kind of technology.
Yeah, it was just like it works. We don't need.
Yeah. Now with a bow and arrow, if the prey is small, like a squirrel or beaver or whatever, the arrow can act like a shock weapon, right? So all I need to do is hit that squirrel with the arrow and knock it out of the tree, and I'm golden. But with larger prey, you basically have got to use the weapon surgically. you've got to get a shot into the thorax to puncture a lung or hit the aorta or hit the heart or something like that. If you're going to drop that animal in a reasonable amount of time, you hit it in the gut, forget it. The thing can go days before
sepsis, basically.
Yeah. And in the Mesolithic in Europe, there's, the archaeological record is riddled with deer that have like healed, bone growing around stone arrowheads.
Oh, dude, yeah. Out here in like the hunting community, we, you know what? I have a beaver skull here. And this came out of a beaver that my buddy and I got. And right about, I wonder if there is, because we didn't really look super hard at this once it was beetle cleaned, but we decided to have it beetle cleaned. And right about here, there was a 22 caliber bullet.
Oh, wow.
Just sitting behind its ear there. Yeah. So somebody had tried to
and it survived
kill this beaver at some point in time. And then all the time I hear about or see on Instagram, right? Like, oh, we shot this elk and, we cut it open, and when we were caving it out, we found like a broadhead that was like in its, or an antler tip that was in its sinus cavity, or a broadhead that was in its scapula. One of my buddies shot an elk, and when they were cleaning it up, they found like an ancient, like not like literally ancient, but like a type of broadhead that people don't really use anymore. Just like in that thing's like fused in like in the bone. It was wild.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Tough critters.
So like for big prey with a bow and arrow, you got to be closer, right? So that's a drawback with a bow and arrow. So the data is hard to come by because reports of like actual foragers hunting, some of it's from anthropologists who lived with groups, others from explorers or, people who encountered, and the data is very patchy and there's not a lot of good quality data. But darts delivered by an atlatl on average are launched from about 40 yards or 40 meters. And
that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really amazing.
Yeah. But again, if it's about the size of a female reindeer or smaller, all you got to do is hit it.
Well, I mean, still though, like the accuracy is like crazy. Despite all the shit that I've been talking about archery hunting, because that is the earliest available season to hunt elk, I do a fair bit of archery hunting, and I do like a lot of antelope hunting. And hitting a target with a modern compound bow at the antelope that I shot 2 years ago. And if you guys don't know this about me, I do a lot of hunting. I'm just going to boil down my philosophy for all the people going, right now. I think that it's all right to eat meat. I don't think it's like cool to decide how that animal lives its entire life first. So as long as an animal is going to have like one bad day, I'd rather it be an animal that got to live its whole life doing the things that animals are supposed to do, not suffering in a factory farm. Thank you for coming to my soapbox talk.
Well, I'll chime in too. Like, having grown up outside of DC and spending a lot of my youth in Shenandoah National Park.
Well, you said you were vegetarian for a long time.
Yeah, I was vegetarian for a while just because I was worried about the sustainability of meat production. But, being in the Shenandoah Park in the winter and you see deer, which are just starving to death because there are no predators.
Yeah.
So we either have a moral responsibility to cull them and keep their population low, or allow the predators to exist that are going to do that naturally.
Yeah.
So something needs to hunt.
Yeah.
Something needs to hunt.
Something needs to hunt for sure. But but anyway, all that's to say, like the antelope, or not all that's to say, but in conjunction with that conversation we just had, the antelope that I shot 2 years ago, and I practice with my bow a lot, it is a very, very, very modern piece of equipment, and people make shots like this all the time, and there are people who can shoot much further than this. I practice with that thing out to about 90 yards.
Yeah.
And I would not shoot an animal at 90 yards, but I shot my antelope last year at 60 yards. And in most circles, that is considered like quite a poke. Also, I mean, that was because I was tuned up. I was like really, for instance, I had that same tag this year, the archery antelope tag. And I didn't hunt it one time because I just hadn't been shooting my bow enough.
Yeah.
And I just didn't think it'd be right to, potentially take a poke at an antelope at any distance.
Yeah.
So the idea that somebody could huck an atlatl.
40 meters.
That's shocking.
But the remarkable thing is it allows you to go after open country prey because you can get close enough by stealth, by wearing skins or whatever, that you can launch your weapon before you've startled them, spooked them. The bow and arrow among foragers is shot at an average of about 25 meters. Yeah. And I think that reflects the fact that you've usually got to be closer to get a well-placed shot.
Yeah.
So it can still be used in open country, but it's a little trickier.
Yeah.
But a hand-deployed spear, like if you're throwing it even 5 or 10 meters, the only way you're going to get open country stuff, and this is the cool thing about Neanderthals, they seem to only have close-range hand-deployed weapons, but their diet is largely open country animals like horse, bison, red deer or elk, and reindeer. So that really, I think, just looking at how modern foragers were deploying weapons and the kind of hunting techniques they were using, I think really changed the way that I thought about Neanderthals.
It's interesting to me that you keep using the word forager even when you're describing hunters. Why is that? Yeah,
so it seems easier to me to say than hunter-gatherer.
Oh,
because
okay.
I'm just using it as a synonym for hunter-gatherer.
Yeah, gotcha.
Foraging peoples, it's common.
Yeah.
But one other thing I was going to say is that because the atlatl works so well on like certain body sizes of prey, there's now a pretty compelling argument that it really only developed in certain places like Europe, like here in North America, like Australia, where the prey characteristics were right, and that in Africa they went straight from like close range handheld stuff to bow and arrow.
Yeah. That's super interesting. And you know, the other like really interesting thing that you see a lot like nowadays is a lot of the folks, and this isn't what I'm into, but I've seen like, I guess, videos of it. There's like kind of like a semi-resurgence in like some people who are interested in spear hunting. And this is not a lot of folks. This is like a handful of folks. And this is not what I would do. This is what a handful of folks do. It is not like Joe Rogan's not going to be talking about like spear and elk anytime soon, I promise. But what a lot of the times what they do is they actually have a very heavy spear and they get up in a tree, you know, and like nowadays they use like tree stands, right? But I guess like if they'd done the same thing back then, they would have just climbed in the tree. And they wait for the game to pass under them. And they use the gravity to really maneuver the spear. And that does two things. One, you have a projectile that is like steadily increasing speed as it reaches terminal velocity. Than decelerating. Yeah. You also are able to use something much more massive. So your energy is not dissipating as it's going. Right. It's actually increasing as it's going. And you solve a major accuracy problem because all you got to do is drop it. You don't have to like account for any sort of like parabolic arc or like force or something. So I think that's it's a way that I never would have considered folks hunting from trees, but like, or sorry, not hunting from trees, but hunting with spears. Yeah. And now it makes like total sense. I'm like, oh, that's absolutely the way that you ought to do that. Yeah. How's that sound to you, man? Like,
no, that's interesting. And there's a paper that I recently saw too, which was arguing that here in the Americas in particular, when like Paleo Indians are probably using pretty heavy spears tipped with, you know, Folsom points or Clovis points or whatever to go after large prey, that they might also be using them as pikes where they're letting the animal charge them and they're embedding one end of the spear in the ground. And letting the animal impale itself.
Punji sticks, dude.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered the hunting technologies from, you know, basically squashing lizards all the way up to atlatls or atlatls and bows and arrows, and we understand the limitations of both of those things, right? You know, the spears or the atlatl projectiles were basically good for medium-sized game under 200 pounds, 100 kilos. And if you were trying to get anything bigger than that, you might drive it into a box canyon and just pepper it with arrows. Is that like a fair summation?
Yep.
This begets like a really interesting question, and something that is absolutely crucial to early man as survivalists, which is how they interacted with different predators as we think of them. So not like, you know, the other apes that they were in direct competition with before they like split off 2 million years ago. Yeah. I feel like when a lot of people think of carnivores, they typically think, well, their mind goes right to like Ice Age stuff, right? Like cave bears and saber-toothed cats and things of that nature. Can you kind of like take us through a little bit of a timeline on that?
Yeah.
Like maybe what the first folks who were not simply avoiding carnivores, but were actually open to confrontation with carnivores. What were those carnivores like? How did that relationship evolve? And like take us through, I guess, when it ceased to be as much of a problem. Although I'll tell you what, I still run into grizzly bears south of town here.
Yeah.
And large carnivores continue to be a problem for man.
For some people, yeah. So the first thing I would say about that is what's really cool is, you know, we talked earlier about this shift to like more animal tissue in the diet and using stone tools and all that. And we see that happening in Africa in a time where the carnivore guild, right, the community of different carnivores which are operating is absolutely bonkers, because there's still this archaic, like old carnivores are still around, which are things like saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas. There are like cursorial running hyenas. Well,
describe like how big is a giant hyena?
Oh, I don't know, like 6 feet tall at the shoulder.
Stop it. Yeah,
no, I kid you not. So they're still around. They're active. But the modern carnivores that we think of in Africa, like lions, smaller like spotted hyenas, leopards, those things have also been established. So it's like a transition from like older paleo carnivore guild to the modern guild. And this is exactly the worst time to start eating meat, right? Exactly the worst time. I think what's going on is that basically, again, my thinking is that early entree is through scavenging, and that it's like a gang war. It's like there's so much competition going on between carnivores. There's a lot of carcasses on the ground out there.
So are you saying that like a lot of these mega predators are coming about kind of on the same arc as early man is coming about as folks that are eating meat and hunting?
Yeah, I mean the carnivores have always been there, right? Long before there were humans.
Yeah,
it's just the nature of the animals has changed, and some have gone extinct, and other ones have originated. But yeah, I mean,
well, I guess I'm trying to decide what you mean by if the carnivores have always been there, why would now have been the worst time to like get into eating meat? Is it because they're becoming bigger? Is it because they're becoming? No,
it's just a very diverse carnivore guild. There's a lot of different.
There are just
kinds
so
of
many different
out there.
kinds at this point.
The environment will only support so many carnivores, right? There's a great study in carnivore ecology, which basically says it takes a standing crop of about 10,000 kilos of prey to support 90 kilos of carnivore, regardless of size. So if you got a little thing like a marten or whatever, it still requires. For you mass them up to get 90 kilos, you still need 10,000 kilos of lemmings or mice or whatever. So it's not like the total mass of carnivores is larger. It's just there's a lot of different kinds of carnivores in the environment. And so maybe that means there's a lot of diversity in carcasses and where to find them. And that's what humans are kind of
keying
in on. Yeah. But for me, what's really interesting is in places like Africa, you're either in the tropics or you're in the semi-tropics, and there's a lot of plant material that humans can eat. And so one way that we can deal with competition with carnivores is to just eat more plant material. You get up into temperate areas, where there's a seasonal part of this, late fall and winter and early spring where there's no plant productivity to eat, or you're dealing with environments like grassland where there's just not a lot of plant stuff that humans can eat anyway.
Or you have things like certain varietals of bears where they're omnivorous too, and they're very interested in the same berries that you're interested in.
Yeah. So it's now a problem. The competition is a problem. You cannot avoid it in the way that you can in the tropics.
Were cave bears omnivorous in the same way?
No, cave bears were vegetarian, actually.
Stop it.
Yeah, I kid you not. They're like full on vegetarian. They competed with hominins for shelters, for like rock shelter space and stuff like that. But dietarily, they're strictly vegetarian. But there were grizzly bears around.
Yeah. Oh, grizzly bears are definitely not entirely vegetarian.
Right.
They're omnivorous, but not vegetarian.
Right.
But the cave bears were?
Yeah. Yeah.
The things with like the 3-inch.
Yeah. But first off, if you look at their teeth, they definitely do not have like the teeth of a carnivore. They've got the teeth of a plant eater. And then we now know from isotopic data confirmed they're like straight on vegetarian.
Huh.
Yeah. Crazy, huh?
That was really, I had no idea, because one of my buddies, he has a cave bear skull.
Yeah.
And it was gifted to him by somebody. And so it's a real cave bear skull.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure how legal that is, so I'm just not going to.
You can actually buy them legally on the market because they're not all that uncommon.
Yeah. But I mean, looking at that thing, I was like, dude.
They're massive, and they're definitely a threat to humans, no doubt about it. They just weren't a competitor for calories.
Okay, so I keep derailing you because you keep saying things that are just like interesting, and my brain is just super ADD.
That's good. I wouldn't want to be saying uninteresting things. So
it wouldn't make for a great podcast. Right. Okay, so when they first start eating meat, like perhaps perhaps part of the impetus of this is that there are all these predators all around, and it's a bad time to eat meat, but maybe because of the amount of carcasses.
Yeah.
Just kind of on the landscape, it really kind of sparks the interest in scavenging, and then they take the next logical steps. What kind of predators are they competing with there, and how are they dealing with it?
Yeah. So again, I don't entirely know in the early days how they're dealing with it, but I strongly suspect they're just trying to avoid competitors as much as But by the time that you get to early humans who are in cold places like Europe or Asia or whatever, now it's critical because you're competing for calories, and there are a lot of really big, badass carnivores in the landscape. And a lot of people, when they think about competition, they think about what we call exploitation competition, which is like, you and I are going for the same calories. And, we don't even have to meet to have that kind of competition, right? If I get there first and I eat the food, then I burned you and you can't have it. But that's only one type of competition which is occurring between these carnivores. The other is interference competition. And that's where carnivores are like directly fucking with each other, right? Where they're driving each other off of carcasses.
The wolf
to steal.
makes a kill in Yellowstone. The grizzly bear comes on and pushes the wolf.
Because the grizzly bear is bigger and badder. Now, the wolves may have numbers, and that may tip the balance a little bit.
Sure.
But a lot of times the wolf's going to win that encounter.
Yeah. The grizzly bear is going to win.
The grizzly bear is going to win that encounter. So we see, like in modern African ecosystems, which are one of the only places in the world where we still have a carnivore guild, which is intact, where you've got lions, hyenas, leopards, cheetahs, and wild dogs all coexisting in the same area. What you find is that, the lions are socially dominant carnivore of that group because they're bigger and they're social, so they operate. Hyenas aren't far behind, so there's a lot of tussle between lions and hyenas. But the losers are cheetahs and wild dogs because they're so much smaller. Even though they may hunt socially, their numbers are not sufficient. And what you find is like wild dogs do better, and this is a problem for wild dog conservation. Wild dogs do better in places where prey density is lower because there's fewer lions and hyenas.
Oh, right.
Because as soon as they make a kill, vultures are going to start getting interested. The lions are going to know. Yeah. And hyenas are going to show up. Lions are going to show up. They're going to drive the wild dogs off. So wild dogs have evolved this strategy where they're what we call like hyper carnivores. They have teeth which are adapted for super efficient slicing, and they just like eat as much as they can. They have extendable bellies, and they get as much off of the carcass as they can before they're displaced.
Yeah, everybody's seen those pictures of the dogs with the Mickey Mouse ears, just kind of like lounging like big drunkards with beer bellies.
Yeah. So Neanderthals were not the socially dominant carnivore in their social guild. So Neanderthals weren't carnivores in the taxonomic sense. Mm-hmm. Usually we use carnivoran to talk about taxonomic carnivores like bears and dogs. But they were heavily dependent on animal tissue, so they ate a lot of meat. So they were not the socially dominant carnivore, and in the African like guilds, the socially dominant carnivores suppress the reproduction of the less dominant carnivores. In African,
is that just by proxy, I guess?
Yeah, because they're winning the competitions.
Yeah, you don't have the excess energy to mate if you're hunting all the time, right?
So
or carry
at that trophic level in Africa, 60% of the biomass is in lions, and the rest of the carnivores divvy up the remaining 40% of the biomass. So
you mean you're saying that 60% of the available prey that is killed on an annual basis, let's say, is killed by lions, and then everything else.
Prey of a certain size. So we're talking about the large carnivores.
Yeah, we're not talking about mice or whatever. Yes. We're not talking about the stuff that birds of prey would eat, for instance.
Lions are controlling most of the action. And so I think this was the case in Europe. And that's my book is titled Thin on the Ground, and it's kind of a double entendre. We know that Neanderthals lived in very low population density, and I think that's part of the reason is because...
Describe a very low population density.
Well, so it looks like Neanderthals lived in social groups of maybe 10 to 15 individuals, whereas modern hunters and gatherers, it's often like more like 25 to 40 individuals. And they're very loosely distributed on the ground such that a Neanderthal may have lived their entire life and maybe only known 100 other Neanderthals.
What? Okay, so say when we talk to Dr. Jeff Meldrum, he is a professor of anatomy and anthropology focusing on bipedal evolution at University of Idaho. If you guys are interested in that, we talked about Bigfoot a lot. We'll put a link to that show in the show description as well. When we talked to him, he estimated that roughly every 35 square miles of good black bear habitat hosted 5 big feet, I guess. Big feet is the plural. What sort of like population density, like using that kind of as like a not a baseline, but like per square mile, like, so one of these Neanderthal group, full disclosure, I say Neanderthal in like day-to-day conversation.
That's fine.
I've been trying to keep up with you, man.
You can spell it either with or without the H.
Yeah.
The Neanderthal is the German pronunciation. It's a German term, so that's why I use that. And a lot of people who work on Neanderthals call them Neanderthals. But it's fine to say Neanderthal. A lot of people do, and that's absolutely fine. But I don't know. Maybe like 0.1 per square mile or something.
Really?
Yeah, a very low population density.
Yeah.
So that's one sense of thin on the ground. And I think part of the reason they're living at such low population density is because the cave lions are probably the socially dominant carnivore, and they're the ones who are really like suppressing the energy capture of Neanderthals.
So not only did we have occasional conflict in the way that, you and I might imagine, or well, not you, but I might imagine these Neanderthals would run into like cave lions. It's actually direct conflict on a, would you say on a social level? Like, does that constitute it if it's repressing? Like,
it's like you kill something and pretty soon the lions and hyenas are there, and you either got to ward them off while you do your business of butchery, or you got to basically let them take what you killed.
Is there evidence that they preyed specifically on Neanderthal?
Yeah. So, like carnivore biologists, when they're trying to figure out who's socially dominant in these interference interactions, one way that they can do that is by saying who's eating whom. So here, like in Montana, where you have both wolves and coyotes, you will find coyote parts in wolf scat. You don't really find it the other way around, right? Wolves are socially dominant over coyotes. And there are a number of Neanderthals who have wounds which are consistent with carnivore damage, like amputations, healed amputations. And we find a lot of Neanderthals in hyena dens and stuff like that.
Describe to me a cave lion. What's a cave lion look like? And you know what might be helpful? There is a mountain lion skull right there. That, so you might be able to point out features.
Beautiful mountain lion. So if you took this and you blew it up to an African lion size, right? The skull would be like this big from front to back, right? So cave lions are the same species as African lions, but they were about half again larger. Yeah.
What pound? Give me a pound.
500 pounds.
Okay.
500, 600 pounds.
Oh.
Yeah. Cave hyenas are the same species as African hyenas, but again, they're about half again larger. There were still some saber-toothed cats around. There were wolves. There were grizzly bears. There's a type of wild dog in Europe called a whistling dog, which is still alive in Asia.
Okay, hold on real quick. You just said that the saber-toothed cats are around. Am I dumb in... I've used the Ice Age as like the terminus of like what I'd like you to describe.
Yeah.
It's actually the start, isn't it?
Yeah. The Ice Ages start about 2.5 million years ago.
Yeah.
So they start before humans ever left Africa.
So I say this kind of frequently on the podcast. I ask the dumb questions and make a fool out of myself so the listeners won't. And
I think they're good questions.
Well, I appreciate it. So
we probably actually are still in the Ice Ages.
Okay.
We're just in a warm interval of the Ice Ages right now.
Okay. I wonder about, well, I can break it down like this, right? So you have, in modern times, right, black bears, grizzly bears, and polar bears, say. Black bears kind of tend to avoid you. And grizzly bears will, it's kind of up to them how that interaction goes. But they don't like typically view humans as like a prey item. Polar bears, on the other hand, they've been known to actually purposefully like hunt humans, which is super unique to, well, pretty much anything, right? These interactions that they had with cave lions, were any of them like direct predatory events? Yeah.
So if you look at modern lions, I've worked in places in Africa where there are lions in the bush, and you have to be prepared for the contingency that you might encounter them. There's other dangerous animals in Africa, and of the dangerous animals, lions are kind of the best to encounter because they have a long history with us. and they're a little wary of us, right? Yeah. And they kind of know how it's going to go down, and we kind of know how it's going to go down. That's much better to encounter a lion than something like an African buffalo. Yeah. Right. Which is crazy and kind of charging. Yeah. So I strongly suspect we do have cases in the fossil record where, Neanderthals are found in hyena dens or with carnivore chew marks or amputations or whatever. But that is probably largely in the context of aggressive interactions which are going on around carcasses or whatnot, rather than the Neanderthals being a source of prey. And there's a reason that carnivores don't prey on other carnivores. They do in some cases, right? Like lions will kill hyenas, they'll kill hyena pups. Hyenas will kill leopard cubs, etc.
They're eliminating competition. They're not like...
Right. It's not like this is my food source, because there's easier ways to do it than going after another carnivore.
Sure.
And so I strongly suspect that no cave lion was ever like, I'm going to go after Neanderthals, right? It was probably much more of a wary kind of aggressive encounter.
So we're talking a lot about cave lions and cave bears, caveman, right? It seems like a lot of the interactions you were talking about, where somebody would get fucked up by a cave lion might have been in competition for not prey, but for shelter. As the ultimate survivalist, what's the Neanderthals' relationship with shelter? Like, was it exclusively caves? And what was the evolution of that?
Yeah, good pronunciation of Neanderthal there, by the way.
Thank you.
Look, we think of them as cavemen because we tend to find them in rock shelters and cave openings. In most cases, they're not going deep in the caves. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they did, but usually they're just using the opening of the cave. And there's evidence that they're living there, right? Because we find tools which have like domestic purposes, like hide scrapers, hearths, residues of animal bones, and whatnot, right? But they're also living out in the open as well, right? There are places where we've got good evidence of like basically tents, which are probably made of sticks and animal hides and that kind of thing. But they're definitely using caves and rock shelters, and in that sense, they're competing with other animals which are interested in those spaces, like cave bears, lions, hyenas, etc. And what is really common to see is an archaeological record where you've got evidence of human occupation, and then evidence of carnivore occupation, then human occupation. So they're either like, oh, there's carnivores there, we're going to find another cave, or they're driving them off or whatever. And then once they've left, the carnivores move back in. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely going on.
Were there any other types of shelters that they use besides caves or these tents? Like, for instance, what is that thing called? You see folks in the bush building them a bunch, where it's basically just a ring of shit that you wouldn't want to walk through.
Or a simple lean-to or something as a windbreak or whatever. The problem is that stuff doesn't preserve well in the archaeological record. And even the open air camps, a lot of times they just don't leave a trace.
Sure.
Yeah. But we've got a few sites where we found post holes from, where there was some wooden thing driven into the ground, which is rotted away. So we know they're doing it.
Yeah, and I guess you'd find
artifacts and
flakes and things like that were like, oh, they've been hanging out here for a little bit.
Yeah.
You were telling me, just on the flakes, because I think this is such an interesting anecdote. You were telling me of one site where you found flakes dispersed in a particularly interesting way.
Yeah. So when I was a kid in high school, there was a field trip, and I can't remember like who even organized it, how I got on it.
Oh, this is a field trip thing. This is not something that you guys found.
No, this is not my work. This is one of my formative experiences as a youngster.
I love it.
So I went on this Saturday field trip. It was to a Paleo-Indian site in Virginia called the Thunderbird site, which is right on the banks of the Shenandoah River. And the site is basically preserved because in in prehistory. I think the site might be 12,000 years old or something like that. The river went into flood, and the flood waters gently dispersed sediments over a campsite or whatever and sealed everything in. So we drive out there near Front Royal, Virginia. We drive out there. They put us in these World War II amphibious vehicles. We go plowing across the Shenandoah River. It was great. And they take us to visit the site. And at that time, they were working on a square in the site, an excavation square, where there was a bunch of just little waste flakes from flint knapping, right? The byproduct of flint knapping. And you could see like a triangle of flakes, and then a distribution of flakes over here. And it was clear that the flint knapper had been sitting like this, and the flakes had just fallen here like a shadow of that was you said, yeah, it's like
I was going to let you have that one, man. I was going to let you have it.
And over here, and then shortly after that, it flooded and got sealed in, and it's like a moment in time. And we rarely get that, because if you excavate a Neanderthal site or whatever, you're often looking at like hundreds, if not thousands of years of deposits accumulating. And to have that moment in time.
Yeah, it's pretty magic. So we've talked about Neanderthals as berry pickers. We've talked about them as hunters. We've talked about them as folks surviving encounters with really insane carnivores. And we've talked about them as, caveman, cave dwellers, and the types of shelters that they use. And all four of those things are pretty compelling when you consider Neanderthals as the ultimate survivalist. Except there's one glaring thing, right? It's there are no more Neanderthals. They lost.
Yeah, they were well adapted to Ice Age Europe.
Well, they did a good job for a while.
Yeah, for like 500,000 years. But somehow, as a colleague of mine said, they managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of evolutionary victory.
Well, that's what's going to happen to us with robots and AI soon enough.
Exactly.
And we'll have a binary podcast on that in 3031. But
so why aren't there Neanderthals around? And there's lots of conjecture. People are like, oh, modern humans outcompeted them. Climate change. So they disappear at a time when the climate is fluctuating very rapidly. We can see this in ice sheets in Greenland, where you have a year-by-year record of snowfall preserved in these big ice cores. At the time Neanderthals went extinct, like the climate is just changing within the lifetime of individuals. And
oh, really? How drastically do you mean?
So from full-on glacial conditions to interglacial conditions like we have today within the lifetime of an individual.
Really?
Now it takes a while for the flora and fauna to kind of catch up with that, but that's massive change. But we know that they had survived periods like that earlier in their history. So maybe it's a combination of rapid climatic change plus having a new competitor on the scene or whatever that did them in. But I don't think it's a coincidence that they disappear when modern humans show up. And this is the story all over the world, right? Like all kinds of things disappear when modern humans show up.
Yeah.
Because modern humans are ecological dominators. We move into ecosystems and we take them over.
Yeah.
And in Europe, I think what happens, so modern humans don't get there until about 40,000 years ago. They're probably in Australia by 60 or 80,000 years ago, and they're in the south of Asia maybe by 100,000 or earlier. So
how do they get somewhere like Australia?
They must have boat technology.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. But something's keeping them from getting into Europe, and it could have been Neanderthals or other groups like Neanderthals.
Wait. How would they get to Australia before they get to Europe? That's mind-blowing to me.
Yeah. The first expansion of modern humans out of Africa is along the southern coast of Asia.
Okay.
Largely because it's tropical environments like the homelands that they're leaving in Africa, and we're already well adapted to that. And you don't have to deal with the seasonality that you get in the temperate zones. And they expand all the way down into Indonesia. And they probably encounter like the remnants of Homo erectus there and the little hobbits and Flores and stuff like that. So
they make their way via Indonesia to Australia?
Yeah. But there's got to be boat technology involved because Australia is never connected to anything, no matter how low the sea levels get. So they've got to be getting out on the water somehow and maybe getting blown out to sea. Obviously, to colonize a new place, you got to have both males and females. So not entirely clear on how it happens, but clearly by 60,000 and maybe earlier, as early as 80,000, they're in Australia.
So before, on an order of 70,000 years, before people estimated that they had bows.
Yeah.
They had boats and organized the provisions.
Somehow, yeah.
I just started believing in aliens, man.
Yeah.
So it's just so swift and dominating the Neanderthals with their low population densities.
Yeah. So here's the three things that I think, because it's an interesting question. How is it that newcomers can supplant a group of humans which are well adapted to their environment, right? And I think those modern humans had three things going for them. One was that they had actual long-range projectile weaponry, which changes the cost-benefit analysis. It also helps you deal with carnivore problem, right? Within 15,000 years of modern humans getting to Europe, cave lions are extinct, cave hyenas go extinct, leopards go extinct.
They're just not dealing with this stuff anymore.
Yeah. They're eliminating competition. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Neanderthals go extinct at the same time. Yeah. They're a competitor. And there's some evidence that Neanderthals are also, once they encounter modern humans, like we know sometimes they're interbreeding because there are people who have Neanderthal genes alive today.
I have 2% Neanderthal.
Yeah, virtually everybody who has ancestry from Europe or Asia has got some Neanderthal genes in them. And there also appear to be some cultural exchanges. And it looks like the Neanderthals are also trying to adopt like spear thrower, atlatl technology. It's just too little, too late for them. So that's one thing. The second thing is I think they had extended social networks. Because as soon as they get to Europe, we start seeing evidence of trade across larger distances. Sure. And
or is that in the way like stone and stuff like that?
Like little figurines. You start to find like Mediterranean shells in the north coast of Germany, 1,000 miles away from the Mediterranean, right? Which are probably little trade items which are being passed from hand to hand across space. And those extended social networks are huge, in part because if you're dealing with competitors like carnivores, you can get several groups together to deal with it en masse. And also because living hunters and gatherers store calories in social bonds, right? Hunting and gathering is risky. And if you encounter a drought or just a run of bad years,
you need somebody to help
you're going
pick
to starve to death. Right. But if you've got people that you're bonded with distant in space, they're going to help you. You can go there when times are bad where you are, and they know they can come to you when times are bad where they are.
Yeah.
So that's the second thing. And the third thing is they may have had dogs. And dogs also change the whole relationship with other carnivores, because now we're working like a super carnivore.
We not only are adaptable to the carnivores ourselves, but we also have this kind of perpetual deterrent.
We've got one on our side now.
Yeah.
And hunters and gatherers around the planet, it doesn't matter where you find them, from the Arctic to the tropics, dogs are part of their toolkit. And they're either helping, pull transport technology, they're helping with hunting, whatever, but they are an essential part of the human toolkit. And there is some very limited evidence to suggest that these early modern humans may have had dogs. Not the dogs that we have today, but earlier kind of versions of dog domestication.
Like our buddy's dog, Juniper. The coyote.
Exactly.
Well, I'll tell you what, man's best friend coming in clutch to write the history of modern man, that's somebody that we'll have to have on. We'll have to have a dog domestication expert, not the ones that make it.
My colleague Brian Hare at Duke would be great for that. He works on dog.
Okay, well, Brian, you're going to have an email in your inbox where we're not even going to ask you to explain away French bulldogs. This was such a fun conversation.
Yeah,
man.
This has been a blast.
We really appreciate you coming out. Y'all ought to check out Dr. Steve Churchill's book, Thin on the Ground. It's a comprehensive overview of Neanderthals and covers a lot of the stuff that we talked about today in way more depth. And you're not interrupted by my questions. So, check it out. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
This has been a blast. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it was great. If you liked what you heard, make sure you like, you subscribe, you do whatever you got to do on whatever platform you're listening. Thank you for listening. Thank you to our producer, Andrew. Thank you to our guest, Dr. Steve Churchill. And until next time, we'll see you later. And hopefully we'll still be the Backcountry Manifesto, not the artist formerly known as. Why don't you just sponsor us, guys? We could all be happy. Thanks again, man. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching this episode of the Backcountry Manifesto podcast. If you want more Backcountry Manifesto, go ahead and check out one of these links right here. And make sure to share the podcast with your friends, comment, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. It really helps us out. Again, thank you very much for watching. Now go check out one of these things. I like this one. This one was a good episode, I promise.